Welcome to this panel discussion on Smashing the Patriarchy. I'm Sindhu Rajasekaran. I'm an author and researcher, and I'll be moderating this session. First, I'd like to thank LawWiser for providing this platform, and we have many distinguished panelists here today. I will briefly introduce them to you, and they will introduce themselves after that. We have Dr. Valli Arunachalam, who is a renowned nuclear engineer with several patents to her name. She has a PhD from Texas A&M, and she is also waging a feminist battle for her rightful stake in the Murugappa Group. We have Shikha Mittal with us, who's the founder of Be.artsy, and she is an awareness expert. She is an IIM alumni, and she has also been listed as a Forbes Woman Power Trailblazer. And we have Rupavardhini Balakrishnan Raju with us, who is currently getting a PhD in law at Oxford University. Previously, she was an IA and AS officer and the director of the National Academy of Audits and Accounts in India. She also has a master's in law from Harvard. So now I'm going to just pass the mic around and ask you all to introduce yourselves briefly, and then we will get into the session. So Dr. Valli Arunachalam, if you could go first.
Thank you, Sindhu. I want to thank you for organizing this fireside chat with LawWiser, and I am very honored to be in this distinguished panel. So a little bit about myself. I'm a scientist, a technologist, and a consultant. I have a PhD in nuclear engineering. No worries, I'm not radioactive. And for over 25 years now, I've had the fortune of working for amazing Fortune 500 companies such as Motorola, Texas Instruments, IBM, AMD, in the fascinating field of semiconductor technology. I've worked on many fronts, from research and development to business strategy to manufacturing. And about 4 years ago, when my father passed away, my father was the head of the multi-billion-dollar family-run Murugappa Group. My life's journey took a complete turn. I hit a very big road bump, and it was in the form of patriarchy at its worst. It was literally like a knife, okay? I could grab it by the blade and I knew that I would be cut and it wouldn't do anyone any good. Or I could grab it by the handle and I could use it to fight for not only my rights, but more importantly, the rights of all women. And I chose the latter. I chose to grab it by the handle. And I'll tell you more about my story later in this program.
Thank you, Dr. Valli. I think we will discuss that more in detail, and in your own personal battle as well, and how that sort of what it means for other women in India across industries. If you could move on to Shikha next.
Hi. So thank you, Sindhu, and thank you, LawWiser, for this opportunity. I'm Shikha Mittal, and I'm a social entrepreneur based out of India. My enterprise is called Be.artsy, and what we've been doing from last 12 years is that we've been raising awareness on prevention of sexual harassment, gender inequality, and financial literacy, specifically for women, not limited to women, but yes, focused on women, but also, we take it to everyone in the country. And we are the education partners for National Stock Exchange and working for Tata's in the insurance sector as well for awareness. And further on, I will also share how patriarchy has impacted me personally, and why did I get into this particular space, and why it is not something planned. And the plan chose me. I didn't choose the plan. And I'm going to talk more about it in the later session.
Thanks, Shikha. I think we have a lot to dig into there, so we will come to that. And Rupavardhini, if you could go next, please.
Thank you, Sindhu, and I'm really happy to be part of this amazing panel and to engage with some of the issues that Sindhu raises in her very important and topical book. So a little bit about me, I'm Rupa Balakrishnan. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Oxford, where I also teach administrative law. Previously, I was a civil servant with the government of India in the Indian Audit and Account Service. And I think so far in both my careers, I've been very privileged to also, well, because of life experiences, to have had insights into the way patriarchy operates, witness at close quarters some of the issues that we need to engage with, and also I've been privileged to have met some amazing men and women working towards gender equality. So I'm excited to talk about these issues further in this panel.
Thanks, Rupa. I think how you worked across so many different industries as well, in the private and public sectors, all of that will come into, we'll discuss all of that as we go along. Thank you so much. So now I think I'll briefly introduce Smashing the Patriarchy, and we will get into the session. So the idea for the topic, the Smashing the Patriarchy, came from my recent book, Smashing the Patriarchy. And my book looks at millennial and Gen Z feminism essentially, and at post-feminism as a topic, because not all women call themselves feminists, but I believe all women are fighting against the patriarchy one way or another. So in my book, I've interviewed several women across industries, across, different communities and castes and cultures and states. And what I found is that all women face implicit and explicit bias across industries. And the book explores how these women fight against that bias and how they overcome that bias. And it also looks at how they resist and subvert all of that, that's thrown again, in their lives. So what I would like to discuss to start off with in this session is to talk about the bias that you have faced in your respective fields personally, and what you have seen in the larger sort of in the industry or in your field itself, the sort of bias that exists on every level, and what you have done personally to overcome that bias, and what you are currently doing in your field or your industry to, to set a sort of change the environment to make it a more feminist workplace or a feminist field. So if you could start with Dr. Valli, as you go along, I will ask you questions as well, but if you could just start. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sindhu. During my graduate studies in nuclear engineering, as the only female student in a class of 20, I was respected for my ability and my skills, and I didn't experience gender bias. And during my 25-year career as a technocrat in the semiconductor industry, which was male-dominated, I was respected for my accomplishments, and I didn't face gender bias. But ironically, it was in my own extended family that I experienced gender bias at its worst. And the Murugappa family, just to give you a little background, it follows the age-old tradition of patriarchy, where the inheritance pathway is from fathers to sons. And every branch in the family has at least one son, with the exception of two family branches. One of the family branches chose to adopt a son to pass on the inheritance. But my father, who was very progressive in his thinking, he passed on his entire inheritance to his wife and two daughters. And post his passing in 2017, in accordance with his wishes, we approached the family to settle us from the business at fair value. And for over 3 years, the family just kicked the can down the road. They lured us into thinking that they were going to settle us, only to backtrack. And we, on the other hand, we were very consistent in our efforts to bring about an amicable solution. In fact, we proposed so many ways in which it could be done in an amicable way. And the family just summarily shot down all our proposals without explanation. So where that left us was okay, so they wouldn't settle us, and neither would they allow us into the business. So I asked for a position on the board of the holding company, a position that my father held for many decades. The family just kicked the can down the road. They said, well, you can apply for a board position at the AGM, which was 9 months away. And I did. And I thought that given my educational qualifications, my vast business experience, that the family would be fair and would give me a chance to contribute and be part of the business. But shockingly, all of them unequivocally voted against my nomination. And this was the first time in the family's history that a nomination had been shot down. And I view this vote as not just a vote against me, but a vote against the values and the principles that are enshrined in the Constitution of India. Many of my male cousins had much less educational qualifications and work experience when they were inducted to the board, some of them right after their father's passing. So why is it that the hurdle is so different, is so much higher for a woman than it is for a man? The only distinguishing factor between me and my cousins is that I'm female. And in this day and age, that should not be the norm. And that is the bias that I'm fighting against. The board rejection, it was a hard blow, but I'm tougher than that. I decided, it just made me more determined to stand up and fight, not just for my right and the rights of my immediate family, but for all the generations of women to follow. Right? We have to inspire them. We have to show by our actions what we need to do to level the playing field for women. And in parallel, what we've been doing is also through our family trust, we've been educating the girl child, because we feel that that is the seed for women empowerment and for smashing the patriarchy, so to speak. In addition to that, I've been talking at many forums, writing many articles, because we have to increase awareness among the community about patriarchal bias. It cannot be swept under the carpet.
Thank you, Dr. Valli. I think whatever you're doing is such an inspiration, really, because the Murugappa Group itself is such a high-profile thing that imagine if this is happening to you, this company which is so huge. Imagine the sort of all the women who come from, say, medium and small businesses, business families who completely sort of cut out of the deal, right? They don't get anything. They don't get to be part of any of that. So we will come to the sort of legal aspects of that in the next sort of topic that we discuss about the Companies Act and all of that. But this is so important what you've mentioned, about how this bias works in the field and how the sort of personal family bias, the gender bias exists not only in the professional environment, but also in the personal, and in the familial sort of space. So we will come to that again in the next session, in the next topic. Now, if I could move to Shikha next and sort of ask you the same questions about your work is that, the social awareness campaigns that you run within the corporate world, which is so important to sort of bring about gender equality and sexual harassment as well. So one thing, if I could ask you right off before you start, is how you've started this before Me Too, and how Me Too has impacted the work that you do, how things have changed in the corporate world and the bias that women face. Has it gotten worse after Me Too has happened, or what is the change? So if you could just start, thank you.
Okay, so my answer to the change part is that Me Too definitely opened up a dialogue in the workspace. In 2013, the POSH law came in. And before that, corporates were not even open to discussing the idea of awareness on prevention of sexual harassment, because there wasn't something like this. But why I started in 2010 was nothing related to law. And I started with the idea of how I was a victim and how I was turning to be a crusader. And when Me Too happened, what happened was a very massive amount of sensitization happened regarding the issue that has been always there. It's nothing new. But what happened is that organizations have started talking about it. They have started taking makeshift awareness programs where there is an online training program. You go tick, 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 and it's a tick in the box. That's what started. But on the other side, men have started feeling very uncomfortable. And so many times I have faced, during the trainings, that every time that I'm doing a training with men, they all have this common thing saying, I don't want women in my team anymore, because if I say anything now, it can be construed as a sexual harassment act. And that is something that I'm noticing in last 4-5 years a lot, which is a negative impact of Me Too movement. But at the same time, why is this happening is because of lack of leadership buy-in. The moment there's a leadership buy-in in the idea of prevention of sexual harassment, and it's made a leading agenda for organizations, and people start putting in more, intangible return on investment attached to the concept, that is when we will see the real change coming in the organization. It will positively impact both men and women and other genders at the workplace, and workplaces in general will become more inclusive.
And if you could also speak a little bit about your own, you were talking about how you'd faced bias and how that made you into a crusader. So if you could just speak a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So, I have shifted 14 jobs in 6.5 years. And 8 out of those organizations were clearly sexual harassment, but the other were, few of them were indisciplinary acts. And that's how I shifted too many jobs in such a short span of time. And when I talk about it, in fact, on internet, very recently, a very leading media wrote about this. And a lot of men in the comment section started, demeaning me, and they started backlashing me on what I'm saying and saying this woman is lying and this is just to promote her. I was like, I am no celebrity. I'm not a TV actress. I'm not looking for fame. Oh, I don't need to do this. And anyways, I was not there to, clarify myself. But when I was facing that, what I was facing was 2 demons. One, I was not feeling safe, and I was always feeling that I'm in a very hostile working environment. 2, I was also very scared of losing my financial, independence. And these 2 demons were standing in front of me all the time whenever I was at the workplace. There were a couple of workplaces which were great also. I wouldn't name the bad ones or the great ones. I would just say that when I was going through all of this, there was no redressal mechanism for me to fall back on at that point in time. And that gave me an idea of, not be that blame game person. And I keep blaming on my circumstance, my gender, government, and, policymakers. I wanted to be that one hook, at least from my side. If I could do something to bring that change that I want to see, I'm just doing my bit in my capacity. I may be able to bring some amount of I may be able to drive some amount of change, and I may not be, but at least I am somebody who's trying her level best in doing what she can to spread awareness amongst both men and women and other genders to understand what is consent, what is gender equality, what is gender inequality. Basically, there's a gender literacy that's lacking in specifically in India. And that also closes eyes for many of the leaders who themselves are men who do not understand many aspects because they themselves are so closed when it comes to talking to their own spouse, talking to their own women in their households and discussing the real issues at their homes. Therefore, what you are doing or experiencing at your house, you're also carrying it forward at the workplace. And hence, I often say that workplace and household is not separate. They go very much hand in hand.
Thank you, Shikha. So we'll talk about women and men in leadership roles as well in the next topic. But now, if you could move on to Rupavardhini next and ask you, you worked in the government sector. You worked in the government. You worked as a lawyer. You're teaching now. So, what is the sort of bias that you faced when you were, working in the public sector and in law? And as a lawyer yourself, you're very aware of this. So, can you just tell us about your experiences and how you've dealt with it?
Thanks, Sindhu. And as you rightly pointed out, I think definitely there's a difference between the way gender bias operates in the public sector and in the private sector. And I think we must acknowledge that part of it is to do with conditions of work, the kind of contract you are on, and workers' rights. So someone on a permanent contract would face a very different sort of situation than someone who is on a more precarious, casual sort of contract. And the thing in the public sector is, especially at least in the Indian context and at the level that I was recruited at, it comes with legal and constitutional protections. And well, that being said, I must also acknowledge before I start speaking about the bias that, well, gender bias also operates in a very intersectional framework, and I'm aware of the caste, religious, sexual orientation, and whether one is differently abled or not, and the privilege I enjoy there. But having said that, gender is still, as we know, very significant axis of discrimination. So in my career as a civil servant, I think where I keenly felt the way my gender affected my role, my job, was the way in leadership styles and in the response of organization, especially men who are junior in the hierarchy. So I entered the service as a very young woman, and most of the people reporting to me were men decades older. So I think it took me a while to get the hang of adopting a leadership style that felt authentic to me, but was also effective. So there were a lot of microaggressions initially and some sort of resistance that I faced. And I felt that I had to work doubly harder in the initial days to sort of prove myself or to be able to assert authority. But at least I had the comfort of the role, the chair and the power that comes with it that I was occupying. And I know that's not the case for a lot of women in leadership positions, and one has to navigate that differently. Second, I think it was more, and it wasn't at an institutional level or anything, it was more personal sort of microaggressions. For example, when I wanted to take study leave and pursue my master's, I faced a lot of judgment and comments about choosing to prioritize my my academic pursuits over, say, maybe having a family, starting a family, things like that. But I think that was a personal thing, and I don't think it was institutional. And in all of this, I had the support of some excellent colleagues, bosses, which sort of mitigated. So it was a mixed bag. And speaking of the public sector, I think more generally, well, sexual harassment is an issue that cut across sectors, right? So at the organization level, it was very important for us to, I mean, we have legal protections in place, but like Shikha was saying, expanding gender literacy and sending the message that there is zero tolerance policy for sexual harassment, and especially the government being the model employer, it was very important. So I was glad that I got to be involved in such sensitization efforts. Well, in my present career in academia, it's too soon. I'm aware of the larger issues that women in academia face, but I can't say that I've personally experienced any sort of gender discrimination so far.
Thanks, Rupa. I think you've sort of led us on to the next topic we'd be discussing, which is women in leadership roles, right? As you were saying, in the sort of in the public sector, where power is equivalent to your role, where you have this position and you just go up from there. It's sort of set. But in the private sector, you could go high and really fall. There's no guarantee for women in their job roles. So if you could just go to that next. I was reading a recent report, a Deloitte report, which was talking about how the share of women CEOs is actually falling in India. So in 2016, we had 6.6% of women who were CEOs. But in 2021, there were just 4.7% of women who were CEOs. So it's actually falling in India. So I want to make you all now talk about, women in positions of power and what that means, women in leadership roles in corporate settings and other settings. And if you could speak a little bit more about the legal aspects, in the sense, what are the protections that women in any workplace have? We do not have positive discrimination in India with respect to women at the workplace, but at least to protect their rights. We spoke a little bit about sexual harassment laws, but what about other rights that women have, like in terms of maternity leave and protecting their jobs in terms of that? If you could speak about those things, and also about the Companies Act of 2013, where we are meant to have a director on the board of Fortune 100 companies, I think. But I think there are lots of ways companies do not women do not sit on all the boards, and they sort of find ways to not keep them in positions of power. So if you could speak about those things as you go along, I will ask more questions, and whoever feels they have an answer can pop right in, but we'll start with Dr. Valli.
Thank you, Sindhu. So I'd like to address all of these within the framework of the Companies Act 2013, because that has been my life for the past 5 years. If you look at the Companies Act 2013, it has two main goals, okay? To increase gender diversity, and then also to enhance the responsibility and accountability of directors and managers, okay? And this SEBI mandate of having requiring one woman independent director on the board of the top 1,000 listed companies, it's stemmed out of that. So in my view, it's a good, and I want to say within quotes, first step towards gender equality, but it's not enough. Right? A lot more has to be done. I mean, just like Shikha and Rupa mentioned, just checking the box is not enough. It's tokenism at best. And just one woman on the board of a company is not enough to effect meaningful change. And being a nuclear engineer, I know one neutron is not enough to power a nuclear reactor. You need a chain reaction. You need a critical mass of women at the very top to drive meaningful change. And so really what needs to be done is step up plans. And it's not enough to just have a plan. It is the execution of that plan that is critical. And in the words of J.R.D. Tata himself, the effective execution of a plan doesn't count. If I may rephrase, the effective execution of a plan is what counts. A plan on paper doesn't matter. And that is what the spirit of that is what we need to take into getting women on boards. Okay, we have to embrace that spirit, that of what women bring to the table, what they can do to the organization. I mean, after all, 50% of your consumer base is women. So it only makes logical sense that 50% of the drivers on the board are women. So they can drive change at all levels through the organization. And I think that is some, and the data is very clear. There have been numerous studies by agencies from the UN to world-renowned consulting agencies like McKinsey's and Deloitte's, like you mentioned, Sindhu, earlier, that clearly show that there is financial gain for companies. For example, there was a 2018 McKinsey report. It's called The Power of Parity. And it said that India has the largest opportunity to increase its GDP through gender equality. And to put a number on it, it's a whopping 770 billion of added GDP by 2025. That's only 3 years away. So, I mean, that's just one of the examples. And companies like IBM, Johnson & Johnson, they have shown through their concerted efforts towards gender equality that it can be done at all levels of the organization, and they've reaped the benefits. And before I conclude, I do want to bring in this. I love this example of what the Rwandan women have done. I mean, the country of Rwanda is a shining example. I mean, it's a country where patriarchy rules, but yet after the civil war, when the percentage of women in parliament was just 17%, the Rwandan Women's Parliamentary Forum has been instrumental in getting that percentage up to 64%. And how do they do it? By following J.R.D. Tata's, I mean, not that they followed his, but that they followed the spirit of what he said, which was in not just making a plan, but executing the plan. And I think therein is the key that we can all learn from. We have to make the plan, but it's more important to execute it. And like Shikha said, we need to have top management in the company be accountable. They need to drive that change and be accountable for it.
If I could just ask Shikha to come in and comment on that about.
Yes. And I just want to take it forward from what Valli just said in terms of increasing the diversity in any company. I just want to stop here and reiterate what Valli said, that there may be a lot of policies getting made in specifically in India. If we have to talk about India, there may be understanding of what needs to be done, but there isn't any execution happening. And why is that so loud and clear? Because when we go to the workplaces, it's evident in small design aspects of a workplace. Why there are washrooms always for women farther than men's washrooms? Why, if we are talking about including more gender, why isn't there another special washrooms for other genders who can feel more comfortable using a third washroom that they can own it? Like women washrooms are owned by women and men own theirs. Likewise, there are some infrastructural inclusions that needs to come from the management. And those are some practical steps that companies need to take before even saying in media that, hey, we are diverse, diversity pro, and we are doing this and that. what everybody, including all leaders across all Fortune 500 companies and all the companies who can afford to bring diversity, is that they need to execute their strategies and plans by making infrastructural change. That is one. And second most important thing is, changing the mindset. You may bring in people with special abilities, but if the mindset of the other people at workplace is that, I will have to waste time with them and they don't understand or whatever, if it's not already inclusive and they're not welcoming before these people are coming to the workplace, it is going to backlash the companies and they will feel that this is all not going to work out. Hence, saying that we are diverse and saying that we are following diversity and inclusion protocols is not enough, and it's not a joke. Just before saying it, first do it in 2 steps. 1, infrastructure. 2nd, change of mindset of your existing workforce. These are the 2 immediate actions that organizations can take.
Thanks, Shikha. You're absolutely right. I think it's so important to make the workplace welcoming for people of all genders, and make it in such a way that you don't feel left out when you don't have to fight for these basic things before you actually start doing the work. So if I could move on to Rupavardhini now and ask you about, in general, we know sort of some of the laws that exist to protect women at the workplace in India. If you could speak a little bit about not only the laws that sort of make women feel protected in their jobs, but also in terms of redressal. If there have been, if there has been bias, how do they fight against that bias? Do women even go to court for their, with regards to their jobs, or they just they don't have time or the money, So could you just speak a little bit about that, and also about laws that protect women's inheritances, but with respect to businesses? Is there a law to sort of about that?
Thanks, Sindhu. I think that's a very, very important issue, and building on what Valli and Shikha were saying. So I think that is what bridges the gap between representation and actual change, between planning and implementation. So speaking of specific laws and whether there's litigation if they're not being followed, I don't have the exact statistics to talk about the amount of litigation. But in general, I think, so we have, of course, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, which mandates internal structures to ensure compliance with the laws. But with respect to other sort of protective laws, like the Maternity Benefits Act, with the Equal Wages Act, it's not so clear-cut. So it depends on the level of unionization, level of representation, the internal structures. So I think it's all like disjointed pieces. We don't have any overarching ways to evaluate compliance, to evaluate what has been the effectiveness of these kind of laws. And coming to your question on implementation of the equal inheritance, again, this is one of those cases with a huge gap between the law and the actual practice, right? Like even with the amendments to succession acts, the fact is that not a lot of people go against their own families in being like in taking these disputes to formal sites of redressal like the courts. And as Valli has recounted through her personal experience, even where people have taken up the fight, we can see the institutional and structural barriers in getting a speedy redressal. So I think that's also partly a larger systemic issue, which speaks to the state of the general, the system, the court system, the backlogs, the delays. But it is compounded by, especially in family-run businesses, it's compounded by corporate structures and also social structures, which unite to produce a sort of like a pressure and barrier, which even prevents a lot of women from going to the courts. And then you have the problems with the way our court systems are structured. So I guess it seems to be a very complicated jigsaw. And when we try to piece together one part of it, there are still so many other missing pieces which have to come together to really make any tangible change when it comes to gender equality, both at the workplace and in terms of leadership and inheritances.
Thanks, Rupa. I think that's sort of, that's the reality, right? We have so many laws, we have all of this, but where does it all come together? And do people even know it exists? And are women using those, are they litigating at all? So if I could come back to Valli for like closing remarks, I think what Rupa just mentioned about taking the legal recourse, right? And then even if you do, the sort of delays that exist and the structural and social barriers that she was talking about, all of that exists, and you've experienced it personally. And as I said earlier, this is such a high profile case and everybody's covering it. And even then all this is happening. So we can only imagine for a woman who does not, comes from a sort of middle class background, who's going through this, what happens to her. So if you could just share a little bit about your experience and what you hope will change.
Yeah, so, I went the legal route only when all options were exhausted. Okay, and I knew going in that it would be a long and hard battle. It would be a David versus Goliath battle, but I have the stomach for it. And I have the patience for it, because I know that what I'm fighting for is 500 million Indian women. And that is what inspires me. That said, I want to talk about the nitty-gritty. When it comes to and of course, Rupa, I stand corrected. But when it comes to personal succession, personal wealth, I think the law in India is much clearer. Daughters and sons are on an equal footing when it comes to inheritance of Hindu ancestral property. The August 2021 Supreme Court ruling took care of that. And then when it comes to co-partnery rights in a Hindu undivided family, daughters and sons have equal co-partnery rights. And that was brought about in the 2005 amendment of the Hindu Succession Act. And thanks to that, I was able to become the Karta of my father's HUF. But I think when it comes to business succession, we have a long way to go. Considering that almost 80% of India's businesses are family run, I think we need swifter action on this front. We need to do this quickly to deter the power plays by patriarchal systems. Just to give you some of my thoughts, I think that capability and credentials, those should be what determine business succession and not gender. And within each family, I think succession planning has to be clear and it has to be gender neutral. And that's how we move the needle forward. And it's good for Indian businesses, for both daughters and sons to be involved in it. I mean, after all, a family business is comprised of men and women. What is a family of only men? Right? So so I think, in the words of Sindhu, we need to smash the patriarchy.
And
thanks, Valli. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you, Shikha, next. And I was just
because I just picked up something very interesting from what Valli said, and I want to take it ahead from there, that she's already taken care of one aspect of smashing patriarchy, which is so much prevalent in the business world, while she was talking about the Supreme Court, taking care of dividing the inherited wealth to both, the female child and the male child. I just want to again bring back, the attention of all of you to the fact that the patriarchy here is again playing a very strong role, because there might be law, but practicing the law inside families and making sure that what law says is happening inside Indian homes is far-fetched an idea. Still, women do not get the property rights. Still, Hindu families are dominated by males. Still, women do not know what is it that they are supposed to inherit, and they are never included in the economical or the financial decisions or even conversations. Hence, again, I'm coming back to the point, having just law in any country for that matter doesn't give solution for the masses. The real solution comes when a law is, a law is defined and it is enforced with a robust system in place that is able to smash patriarchy and similar evils in the society, so that we can bring forward a more prosperous community, society, and countries.
Thanks, Shikha. I think what you said about this is something that I researched in my book and found it as well, that, women do not always inherit what is due to them because they must have been paid a lot of money for their weddings or whatever. So they just sort of give up on their inheritance rights, right? So that happens a lot. So this is the thing, right? In the feminist discourse in India, it's obviously legal laws are very important to protect us, but obviously, are they being implemented? Are women using it? And all of that comes to the question arises. So if I could move to Rupa now and ask you, how do you think, in a country like India, right, where laws exist, but people do not know it exists, so they do not. So how do you think we can sort of change? And as a civil servant, as an ex-civil servant, so you can, what do you think? What can change or what should happen?
I think, as the panel has rightly pointed out, law is but one part and one tool for social change. So while we do have laws, but it's an important starting point. And it's so while we have laws, part of it is lack of fairness. So multiple organizations will have to be involved. Of course, the government must play a leading role in information dissemination, and but a lot more can be done on the part of civil society to widely disseminate information about these laws. Second is access to justice. So even if you know that laws exist, for most people, finding legal representation is a very costly affair. So, so we need to think about what access to courts, how we can make that easier, whether there can be alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, because again, as you rightly pointed out, most people do not want to go against the family, do not want to take the fight. There's still that stigma, and it comes at very steep social and personal costs. So I guess most women would give up on the right. So maybe alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, which don't necessarily carry the stigma of a court battle, but could maybe potentially ensure that justice is delivered. I think these are all options. No one option by itself would be enough, and we definitely have a long way to go. But I think talking more about these issues itself is a great point to start, because then you destigmatize, and more stories that are being heard, and then people realize this is a very common thing, and this is something that needs serious consideration and action over. So I think it's important to keep talking and to invest in resources institutionally and socially to take this forward.
Thanks, Rupa. I think that sort of pulls it all together. So I think we've discussed various issues here, and Valli has shared her personal story and how that impacts women, in India. And Shikha has spoken about how within corporate settings, there is no awareness of how gender operates, and people need to know more about that. And you've spoken about various legal aspects. So I think we've run out of time, but if any of you would like to make any closing remarks, you can go ahead, and then I will tie it up together and say bye-bye. Valli?
Yeah, sure. If I may, this was a fireside chat. Other than the absence of a fireplace, I think what I detected was a fire within each one of us to do what is right. And that's what we need to focus on. All of us here on this panel, we faced gender discrimination in some form or the other. And what is remarkable is that each one of us has not backed off. We've stood up, we continue to fight. And what we now need to do is to collaborate. We need to gather momentum. We need to rally for change. We need to inspire future generations of women. And being a physicist, what I will tell you is that if we have a critical mass, we can build the acceleration, and mass times acceleration is force. And with that force, we can break gender discrimination faster. And by the way, that's Newton's law of motion, and it has withstood the time for centuries.
And I would like to say to everyone in two formats. One, to all the leaders, lawmakers, and enforcers, that any change that you're thinking that you're going to bring after the position that you hold currently, you may not be there to bring that change. So do that change that you want to see later, now. And to all the people who might think that they are victims, you are not, because you're empowered the moment you were born with that magical body of yours. All you need is to be equipped. So equip yourself with all the right tools and resources, and don't victimize yourself. At this point, I would like to thank you so much, Sindhu, for bringing all of us together.
Thanks, everyone. I think just being part of this wonderful panel and being surrounded by inspiring women, I just want to reflect on the value in solidarity and say that, just personally, a lot of the good things that have happened to me have been because there have been other women who have helped me through difficult phases, shown the way, and we all stand on the shoulders of giants when it comes to fighting for gender equality. And I want to be careful to say people, because it's not just women, but there are also men involved. We are all fighting for a certain set of values, and so solidarity cuts across. And thank you, Sindhu, for this really, really exciting and thought-provoking panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Rupa. And thanks to all of you panelists for joining us. I think it's so important for all of us to take the power and inspire other women to take the power as well. And we are smashing the patriarchy. So thank you so much.